Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Very happy to have Suresvara Prabhu, His Grace Suresvara Prabhu again amongst all of us. Today's session is our Srila Prabhupada. It happens to be the Paribhash Sutra, or the central theme of the entire Founder Acharya series. We're very grateful to you, Prabhu, that you, week after week, are taking out time and making us more fortunate in becoming better and more surrendered Srila Prabhupada Anugas. Over to you, Prabhuji. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Acharya Prabhu. Hare Krishna. So, thank you all for welcoming me back to your online Sangha. Today's lesson from the Founder Acharya Essentials series is called Our Srila Prabhupada.
One second, Prabhu. I think you have somehow gone on mute. Can you unmute yourself, please? We missed the last 20 seconds. Last 20 seconds we missed.
Okay, I'll start over. All right. So, yeah, the name of the lesson is Our Srila Prabhupada. And it's another history lesson. On May 11th, 1969, the American counterculture poet Allen Ginsberg met with Srila Prabhupada at the Hare Krishna Temple in Columbus, Ohio. Columbus, Ohio is famous as being the all-American city. Columbus people pride themselves on being the best Americans, the best patriots. So Prabhupada went there to discuss the program he was having with this famous poet Ginsberg that the following evening. And also he was there to discuss how Krishna consciousness could spread widely in materialistic America. Alluding to a prophetic text from the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, Prabhupada assured the poet Ginsberg that people everywhere, quote, will take advantage of Hare Krishna for the next 10,000 years, unquote. Ginsberg had seen Prabhupada rouse crowds to chant Hare Krishna in New York and San Francisco. But the conservative students at the Ohio State University would present a special challenge. In his book, The Hare Krishna Explosion, Hayagriva Prabhu described what happened on the night of the event. After entering the auditorium, Prabhupada, smiling and glowing, ascended the stage where poet Ginsberg invited him to lead the chanting. Prabhupada started slowly, singing a simple melody, and gradually picked up the tempo while playing hand cymbals. Then, so what follows now is a direct quote from Hayagriva's book about what happened. Prabhupada stands and raises his hands, inviting the students also to stand and dance. The response is immediate. Students in the aisles are the first to their feet. I should explain that. Students in the aisles. There was only enough seats by the fire department code. The building was only supposed to accommodate 1,500 guests. But Prabhupada was such a draw. It was so well advertised, and everybody knew Ginsberg, and they were curious about Prabhupada. So over 2,000 people actually came. So they were just everywhere. They were in the aisles and all over the place, where they weren't supposed to be, actually, in case there was a fire. But anyway, so the students in the aisles are the first to their feet. Then students in the rows and balconies arise. There is little room for dancing. A spontaneous bounce catches hold instead. As Prabhupada bounces on the dais, the students bounce also. As he waves his arms, they wave theirs. He leads them as a maestro conducts an orchestra, until gradually the inherent spiritual rhythm of the mantra itself prevails. The young voices empowered by the mantra, not even knowing the meaning of the words. Quote, this is a quote from Ginsberg. Later on, he was reflecting. Quote, the amazing fact is that everybody was able to get up and dance, nearly leaping out of their skins. So this is quite a feat, an accomplishment, because again, Columbus is very conservative and is famous as being the all-American city. But Prabhupada had all these conservative, well-behaved Midwesterners just dancing like crazy and chanting Hare Krishna. And they didn't even know really what they were doing. But because of Prabhupada's potency, they did it. They just knew it was blissful. And this was not just students, it was students and professors and people from the local town. So many people came to this event. Had Prabhupada revealed the Puranic texts directly preceding the 10,000-year prophecy he had mentioned to Ginsberg, the poet would have likely proclaimed Prabhupada its fulfiller. In those texts, Lord Krishna tells the goddess Ganga that 5 millennia hence, he will send his mantra upasaka, worshipper of the holy names, to spread the chanting of Hare Krishna and purify earth, water, sky, and humanity everywhere. Quote, this period of worldwide chanting will continue for 10,000 years. While fulfilling this and other Vedic prophecies, Prabhupada never once called attention to himself, instead calling everyone's attention to Krishna. Over the millennia, the Lord would set the stage of world history to send his, quote, worshipper of the holy names to just the right place, at just the right time, to launch the Hare Krishna movement alone. So the next section I call Alone in America. Alone in America. When Prabhupada's spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, dispatched the first Vaishnava preachers from India to Europe in the 1930s, he gave them the full institutional support of the Gaudiya mission. But after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's demise in 1937, the mission's leaders neglected their master's instructions to form a governing body and work cooperatively to spread Krishna consciousness. The infighting that ensued so fragmented the mission that by the time Prabhupada arrived in America to preach in 1965, there was no institution left to support him. In New York City, with almost no friends or funds, Prabhupada nonetheless saw a fertile preaching field in materially prosperous America, where people were spiritually starving and looking to the East for truth. Hopeful of reviving the cooperative spirit that once galvanized the Gaudiya mission, Prabhupada began writing his now isolated godbrothers, appealing to them to help him seize the moment. The following excerpt from one such letter to the mission's former manager is significant. Quote, I came here to study the situation, and I find it Very nice. And if you are also agreeable to cooperate, it will all be very nice by the will of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada. If you agree, then take it for granted that I am one of the workers of the Sri Mayapur Chaitanya Mutt. That's the mutt that the person Prabhupada was writing to was in charge of. I have no ambition for becoming the proprietor of any mutt or mandir, but I want working facilities. That was an excerpt from a letter to Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, 8th November 1965. These are all in the database, these letters. But if you only have time to read one, read that one, November 8th, 65. It's pretty amazing. A quote, servant leader, long before the phrase's time. Prabhupada would still receive no tangible cooperation from his godbrothers. With only the scriptures he translated, annotated, and brought from India to sustain him, Prabhupada endured, mostly alone, the brutal New York winter that followed, writing letters and translating the Bhagavad Gita. I was living not far from, I grew up outside, I was born in New York City in the Lower East Side, but I grew up about 35 miles away in a suburb in a state called Connecticut, the town of Stamford, Connecticut. And I remember that winter. It was wicked. It was so bad that at one point there was a total blackout of all power from Washington, D.C. all the way up to Montreal, Canada. And Prabhupada was, growing up in India, living in India all his life, he was used to that. But so many blizzards, snowstorms, and the wind. I mean, he just had his dhoti and his little pointy white rubber shoes, and somebody gave him an overcoat. I think Dr. Mishra, Ramamurti Mishra, his friend, gave him an overcoat. And there he was wearing a Swami hat. Maybe you've seen the pictures. And those winds, they would go right through you. And it was enough to take a person's breath away. It was so cold. But Prabhupada endured. Next section, from obscurity to Swamiji. The following spring, Prabhupada relocated to a loft in New York's infamous Bowery district. Rife with derelicts and crime, the district was dangerous, but Prabhupada took the risk to reach young seekers nearby. In the loft, Krishna sent Prabhupada a few regular listeners. So Prabhupada was on the Upper West Side. That's where Dr. Mishra was, and Dr. Mishra gave him a room that he wasn't using on the Upper West Side. But then Prabhupada heard, because sometimes he would attend Dr. Mishra's programs, even though Mishra was a Mayavadi. And so some of the guests, they liked Prabhupada, or they call him Swamiji. So when Prabhupada told them his mission, then they said, oh, well, if you really want to recruit helpers for your mission, then you should go down to the Lower East Side, where all the seekers are. Now, the Lower East Side, it's true, it was full of young seekers, but it was also full of crime and just, it was really low-class place. I mean, it's better now even, but 50 years ago, 60 years ago, it was just very dangerous and dirty, and yeah. But Prabhupada, out of compassion, he left the place where he was, and he went down to the Lower East Side, not knowing how he would live. So, let's see. Let me start that sentence again. So he got a really cheap room in a Bowery loft. Loft means an upstairs kind of open room. In the loft, Krishna sent Prabhupada a few regular listeners who came to his aid after his young LSD-crazed loft mate attacked him, forcing him to flee. So Prabhupada was sharing this upstairs place with a young guy doing LSD and other drugs. And he must have been in the middle of a bad trip or something, because the guy just turned on Prabhupada and attacked him. And Prabhupada actually had to run out of the place. And he went into a phone booth and he called up one of the regulars, who was Michael Grant, who later on became Mukunda, who is now Mukunda Maharaj. And he said, Michael, can you help me? I need my own place and this isn't working. This person wants to kill me. So with the regulars' help, Prabhupada at last secured his own place, a cheap storefront on the city's Lower East Side, and that became 26 Second Avenue. Forced by the non-cooperation of his godbrothers, Prabhupada dropped the attempt to revive his spiritual master's institution, and instead, at 26 Second Avenue, on July 13th, 1966, he officially launched, quote, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, unquote, a brand new branch of the same Gaudiya Sampradaya. I mean, try to imagine this. Prabhupada did not even know where the next month's rent was coming from. But still, his vision was, he's starting a worldwide movement. So that's what he called it. And that's what was on the marquee in the storefront window. International Society for Krishna Consciousness, which was just a little hole in the wall. 26 Second Avenue was a tiny place. A brand new branch of the same Gaudiya Sampradaya. Empowered by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Krishna's golden avatar, and his spiritual forefathers, the previous Acharyas, Prabhupada inspired a growing flock of followers that summer to chant Hare Krishna and take up the process of Bhakti Yoga. No small miracle in New York City, the capital of, quote, do your own thing. He did it by stressing the do's more than the don'ts, the chanting more than the taboos. He had faith that as Krishna filled the consciousness of his young aspirants, they would outgrow their old ways and savor the higher taste of devotional service. It worked. By late November, after a few batches of devotees had received initiation, one of the earlier initiates approached Prabhupada, quote, Swamiji, what did you say the rules are for this practice? Now, this is after 3 initiations. Prabhupada had mentioned the rules, but he didn't stress them. He was following Rupa Goswami's yena tena prakarena, just somehow or other get them to chant. And then all the rules will follow. So what did you say the rules are for this practice? Just what Prabhupada had been waiting to hear, for he knew they would follow the rules only when they were ready. The next day, November 25th, 1966, Prabhupada posted the regulative principles of Krishna consciousness on his apartment's bathroom door. So there was the storefront, and then behind the storefront, up a flight of stairs, were apartments, and Prabhupada lived in apartment 2C. And all the hippies that were coming to him, they were using his bathroom to take a shower. Prabhupada is so tolerant. And so he knew that they would see this notice of the rules on the bathroom door, because they all went to his bathroom. So that's where he posted the notice. Next section, only he could lead them. You might recognize that. That's the 3rd volume of the Lilamrita. Only he could lead them. In January 1967, Prabhupada followed the counterculture trail to San Francisco where disciples had opened ISKCON's second temple. There he inspired a new wave of devotees to chant Hare Krishna and serve Lord Chaitanya's mission. As in New York, the young aspirants marveled at Prabhupada's pace, a whirlwind of chanting, teaching, worshiping, cooking, public preaching, private speaking, initiating newcomers, and translating scripture during the wee hours while everyone else slept. When Prabhupada returned to New York in April, despite his 70 plus years, the pace continued unabated. For his first followers, this was all part of the wonder that was Swamiji. So it was quite a shock when, toward the end of May, Prabhupada suffered a heart attack and a stroke. He was their absolute shelter. Now they would have to take care of him. To help Prabhupada recuperate, the devotees brought him to a beach bungalow on the Jersey shore. But the weather was gray and blustery, so with the doctor's permission, Prabhupada flew to San Francisco, where the devotees hoped the California sunshine would heal him. Alas, not to be. When the mountains and fog near his cottage mostly obscured the sun's rays, Prabhupada said he would have to return to India for its Ayurvedic medicines, massage, and bracing heat. Hayagriva explained what happened next. So this is again from the Hare Krishna explosion. Quote, some of the devotees, worried that Swamiji has decided to go to India to leave his body, ask him whether during his absence, one of his godbrothers should come to America to assume ISKCON leadership. The minute this question is presented to him, we sense that it is offensive. Swamiji becomes very grave, closing his eyes. Then suddenly we see tears falling down his cheeks. Quote, my Guru Maharaj, he was no ordinary spiritual master, he says, wiping the tears. He saved me. Later, Swamiji tells us what we should have always known. There is no one to replace him. The very idea is insulting. Quote, if someone comes and tells you something different, he says, you will be confused. Unquote. Owing to his absolute surrender to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and Lord Chaitanya's mission, Prabhupada knew he was being uniquely empowered to turn people outside India's spiritual culture toward Krishna consciousness, and that only he could lead them. In the next section I call From Swamiji to Prabhupada. Although Prabhupada's uniqueness among contemporary gurus was obvious to his followers, they were still calling him Swamiji, a rather common address. In the spring of 1968, Krishna revealed an honorific title, more befitting Prabhupada's position. When a devotee learned that the Sanskrit affix G was a term of endearment, he asked Prabhupada if he could add it to his wife's name, Govinda, and call her Govinda G. No, actually, G is a third-class form of address, Prabhupada replied. It's better not to call her Govinda G. Now, Govinda Dasi, that's the wife, a plain-spoken Texas lady, remembers the rest. So what I'm going to tell you now is a memory from Govinda, my god sister Govinda Dasi. of how the name change happened, how Swamiji became Prabhupada. And you might be a little surprised by the conversation that goes back and forth between her and Prabhupada, because Prabhupada allowed a very kind of familiar relationship between Govinda and him. He let Govinda treat him as a grandfather. And sometimes she would scold him. She was serving as his secretary, and Gaurasundar, her husband, was serving as the personal servant for massage and cooking and stuff like that. So anyway, Govinda says this. So I spoke up. I was sitting right in front of him, and I said, well, if it's a third class form of address, why are we calling you Ji? Why are we calling you Swamiji? And he said, it's not very important. And that was Prabhupada's first reaction. It's not very important. I said, oh no, it's very important. If it's a third class form of address, then we don't want to call you that. We want to call you the most first class form of address. So tell us, what would be a good name for us to call you by? So once she insisted, then Prabhupada's mood starts to change, because just as Prabhupada wasn't stressing the regulative principles in 66 with those first followers, only when they asked him for the rules did he give them. So now Prabhupada's seeing another opportunity here, because it's coming from a disciple. The disciple wants to call him something more. He knew he couldn't demand that they call him something very grand, because they didn't have any culture. They didn't know anything about Prabhupada or anything, or founder Acharya. So she's saying, what would be a good name for us to call you by? And then Govinda says, and he was very humble, very reluctant, but I pressed him. We've got to change this. And he said, oh, you can call me Guru Dev or Guru Maharaj or Prabhupada. So I said, well, that's 3. We need 1. So which one is the best? And he answered, Srila Prabhupada is nice. That is the best. So I said, from today, you will be called Srila Prabhupada. Unquote. Never demanding respect, but nonetheless commanding it by his own endearing example, Prabhupada had seized Krishna's teachable moment to quietly disclose the appropriate address. In the disciplic line, there are many Guru Devs or Guru Maharajas, but, quote, Prabhupada is a guru of gurus, quote, a master at whose feet all masters sit. So if Prabhupada had said Guru Dev or Guru Maharaj, the name change would not have been so momentous. But Prabhupada is thinking of the future. And by this time, Lord Chaitanya has revealed to Prabhupada that, look, your godbrothers are not going to help you. They can't help you. You're going to have to make a clean break from the Gaudiya Math. You're going to have to start a brand new branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, and you're going to have to be the founder Acharya. So Prabhupada had already gotten that kind of message from the events that unfolded. But he knew he couldn't demand that kind of respect. He knew that they had no idea of his mission or anything like that. They thought they just had Swamiji to themselves, and it was going to be them and Swamiji forever and ever. So Prabhupada gradually revealed to them the mission, his position. And so it was very interesting how Lord Chaitanya revealed all that to Prabhupada, and then how Prabhupada gradually revealed that to us. And we're still trying to understand Prabhupada's position in ISKCON. We're still struggling to make it a very founder Acharya-centered culture. Okay. And I will be finishing this soon, this reading. So start thinking of questions or comments. So the next section is called From Prabhupada to Founder Acharya. In just 12 years, Prabhupada would circle the globe 14 times, initiate thousands of disciples, and establish the Krishna consciousness movement on every major continent. During his travels, he would found over 100 temples, schools, farms, and restaurants, all while writing and publishing dozens of translations and commentaries on foundational Vaishnava scriptures. But success would bring enemies too, and the worst enemies from within. In 1970, after critical remarks by a few of his godbrothers negatively influenced some of his leaders, Prabhupada asked a dozen trusted disciples to help him form a governing body commission. This all happened the month I joined in July 70. I didn't know, I was brand new, but that was the month that Prabhupada actually formed the GBC. Form a governing body commission, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had requested his disciples. And Prabhupada did this to protect ISKCON and ensure its continuance. On July 28th, a legal document called, quote, Direction of Management, listed the GBC members and officially referred to, quote, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, as ISKCON's, quote, founder Acharya. So at least it was on paper. We didn't really understand any of that. GBC or founder Acharya or Prabhupada, it was all just sort of new. But at least it was on paper. But bad signs persisted. On one of his books, his ISKCON Press identified the author as simply, quote, A.C. Bhaktivedanta, nearly stripping his name of any spiritual significance. When I joined that summer in July 1970 in Boston, the place where I joined was the home of Prabhupada's press. It was before the BBT. It was called ISKCON Press. And Brahmananda took sannyas that spring, and he was in charge of the press. So every time, and we were publishing, what we were doing, we were publishing the second canto, because Prabhupada had already given the first canto, his Indian Bhagavatams. We didn't do that. We didn't do the cleaned up American version with proper English yet. We just went right into the second canto, and we were publishing this 10 chapters in the second canto. We were coming out with paperback chapters, and every time a chapter came out, then Brahmananda, he would take it to Prabhupada. And mostly Prabhupada was staying in America in those days because that's mainly where the movement was. So he would typically go to LA. And so he brought this chapter, one of the chapters, I forget if it was The Cause of All Causes or Process of Creation, one of those. So that's third. Our answers by citing the Lord's version. Anyway, on one of them, I remember I noticed it because I was living in the basement of the temple where the books were bound in a very amateurish way. And I noticed the cover. It's simply identified the author as A.C. Bhaktivedanta. No Swami, no Prabhupada, no founder Acharya. Nearly stripping his name of any spiritual significance. When his new publishing house, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, moved into its headquarters, that was a few years later, Prabhupada saw nothing on the building identifying the organization's name or founder. And when some of his temple presidents wrote him on their own stationery, Prabhupada had to tell them to write him on official temple stationery, displaying his full name and founder Acharya title. In other words, ISKCON Temple, founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, just to get it in everybody's consciousness that it's Prabhupada's organization and he's the founder. It all belongs to him. Now, why did Prabhupada do this? Well, for good reason. Because, for example, one day, a non-complying, some temple president who didn't follow what Prabhupada said to do, temple president secretly sold the temple, collected the money, and disappeared. He just ran away with the money because it wasn't in ISKCON's name. It was in his name. And then one day he just sort of cashed out as he was paying the mortgage. He just collected the equity and disappeared. He, not ISKCON, had been the legal owner. After the last incident in the summer of 1974, Prabhupada drafted an amendment to his earlier management document, including a strongly worded statement about his position and authority as ISKCON's founder Acharya. So if you have the database, you go into under legal documents and you'll see direction of management, and then you'll see another one called amendment to that document. And here's part of how it reads, the amendment. Prabhupada himself dictated the document to the GBC, and then they put it in proper English. And then here's how it reads. It is declared that His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is the founder Acharya of ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He is the supreme authority in all matters of the society. His position cannot be occupied by anyone else, and his name and title must appear on all documents, letterheads, publications, and buildings of the society. And today we could add, because it's the digital age, websites. Pre-COVID, when I was traveling around the world with my seminars live, actually this was pretty early on, it was around 2013, I went to one of our big centers in Europe, and just for fun, I went onto their website to see how they were presenting Prabhupada on their homepage. I couldn't even find him. He wasn't even there. And finally, I noticed a tab that said history. So I clicked on it, and sure enough, there's a little photo of Prabhupada and a little tiny blurb about how he's the founder Acharya. Just completely putting Prabhupada in the background. And then I went back to the same center next year, and by that time, it was becoming more understood, Prabhupada's position, because we had that Prabhupada's position committee and the founder Acharya document that the GBC published, and they understood, and they were to their credit, they were displaying Prabhupada very prominently on their homepage. He is the supreme authority in all matters of the society. His position cannot be occupied by anyone else, and his name and title must appear on all documents, letterheads, publications, and buildings of the society. It's called Amendments for Official Documents, July 22nd, 1974. Now, interestingly, the same summer that Prabhupada is doing that legally, he's trying to protect ISKCON again by reasserting his position as a supreme authority in ISKCON. He's translating the CC. It's quite a feat. In like a year and a half, he did the whole CC, translation and purports. So that same summer, even as Prabhupada was reasserting his supreme position in ISKCON, while translating the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, he also reasserted his and his followers' fidelity to Srila Bhakti Siddhanta and Lord Chaitanya's mission. So here's an excerpt from the purport to CC Adi Lila 10.84. As members of the Krishna consciousness movement, we belong to the family, or disciplic succession, of Saraswati Goswami, and thus we are known as Saraswatas. Obeisances are therefore offered to the spiritual master as Saraswata Deva, or a member of the Saraswat family. Namaste Saraswate Deve, whose mission is to broadcast the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Gauravani Pracharane, and to fight with impersonalists and voidists, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschat Yadeshatarine. So then a little excerpt, we're reminded of the mission and how, and also of our ancestry. We're coming from Mahaprabhu and through the Gaudiya mission that Bhaktisiddhanta started. Prabhupada was hopeful that if his followers would do as he was doing, keeping his movement connected to its spiritual roots while creatively fulfilling Lord Chaitanya's desires, it would survive the ravages of time and eventually carry Krishna consciousness to every town and village on earth. So that's the end of the reading. We're going to do questions and answers now. And the next lesson is lesson 4, and that's called his mission's roots. So that's going to go from the time Prabhupada met his Guru Maharaj all the way to the time he got on the Jaladuta, his mission's roots. Okay, so I'll be very happy to receive your questions and comments now. Hare Krishna. We'll go for, let's see. Oh, we have 45 minutes. Good.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. A question has come. How did Prabhupada's Pranam mantra manifest?
Good question. So when there was a threat, how did Prabhupada's Pranam mantra manifest? When there was a threat to his movement in that spring and summer of 1970, exactly where as Prabhupada put it, the poison was coming from. It was coming from some jealous godbrothers in India who were really trying hard to stop ISKCON from getting any land in Mayapur, because Prabhupada was trying to get land in Mayapur. And they were minimizing Prabhupada's importance. Oh, you know, Bhaktivedanta Swami, when he was in the 1920s and 30s, when he became connected with the Gaudiya Math, businessman. And that's why he's successful now in America, because he knows how to do business. I mean, give me a break. You know, it was Prabhupada's, even if you just take that idea. So if you're a businessman, is it smart business to go all the way over to the other side of the world with no capital, no contacts, no prospects? All Prabhupada brought with it was his faith in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and becoming the founder Acharya of a worldwide branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. That was the furthest thing from his mind. He didn't want to start anything new. He wanted to revive the Gaudiya mission, but because his godbrothers couldn't do it, Lord Chaitanya revealed that you're going to have to start something fresh here. So try starting a worldwide movement from nothing materially. Show your potency. Can you do that? But Prabhupada did it. He had nothing. He was living like a beggar in the Bowery. So what happened was, when this threat came in 1970, when some godbrothers, not all, most of them eventually, as we showed last time, they finally acknowledged Prabhupada's greatness. But some were really trying to stop us from getting land, or stop Prabhupada from getting land in Mayapur, minimizing his position and creating a disturbance with some of Prabhupada's leading disciples. Because that was being spread around, that Prabhupada was not all we think he is, right? So one of the ways that Prabhupada protected ISKCON, before starting the GBC, before approaching some trusted disciples who weren't contaminated by that propaganda coming from India. One of the things Prabhupada did was he did something very non-traditional. He made up his own pranam mantra. Usually it comes from disciples, traditionally in India, where the tradition manifested, for thousands of years. The disciples, because they're raised in a spiritual culture and Sanskrit is known, they, inspired by the good qualities of their Guru Maharaj, they offer this pranam mantra to their Guru. But Prabhupada, we didn't know anything. We didn't know up from down, even how to clean ourselves or eat or anything. It was like Prabhupada said, this is a spiritual kindergarten, this 26 Second Avenue. And same in the West Coast, at 518 Frederick Street. It was just spiritual infants. So Prabhupada in the spring of 1970, he gave the mantra, and it captures his mission. Our respectful obeisances are unto you, O spiritual master, servant of Saraswati Goswami. You are so kindly preaching the message of Lord Chaitanya in these Western countries. Now, why did Prabhupada mention that? Paschatya Desh Pracharane, Paschatya Desha Tarane. Because Prabhupada knew, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta knew, that whatever the West does, and specifically America, this is still true today, as compromised as America has become by its own problems. People still copy America, they copy the West. So Prabhupada knew that if Americans became Krishna conscious, then people would take notice. And then when he brought the movement back to India, with his dancing white elephants, as he said, as he referred to us, his white-bodied, men and women doing Sankirtan in the streets, that people would be amazed. And it worked. So he gave us that pranam mantra as part of the package to fortify ISKCON, protect ISKCON from this propaganda. He was being uniquely empowered because of his unique surrender to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and the six Goswamis and the whole parampara going back to Mahaprabhu to do what he did. Good question. Any more?
Devotees can put their questions in the chat box, or they can raise their hand, they can be unmuted.
I'm drinking a lot because I just watered the plants here in Arizona, and it's like it was 100 degrees by 7:30 a.m. or next 6:30 a.m. So I did it before the Zoom, and it's so ungodly hot here. It's like 115 now in Celsius. That's like 45 or the high 40s. Okay. Any more questions?
Prabhuji, can you tell us something about the time when Prabhupada got the attack and he decided to get some sunlight and he came to India and then he went back? How were the disciples doing during that time, and how did they face the situation?
Yeah, so that was quite a shock. As I said in the reading, Prabhupada was so amazing. Everybody was just used to him doing everything. So when he got that heart attack and stroke, it was just before what we call here Memorial Day. Memorial Day is always at the end of May. And it's a day when America honors the people who fought in wars to defend America. I mean, now we're a little less naive, and now we know that these wars that people have fought for many times were just to protect the American empire, to protect the interests of the rich. Like the Vietnam War was totally wrong. It wasn't like fighting Hitler and like that. Anyway, so to honor the people who fought in the wars. So Prabhupada was preparing a speech for that occasion. He was going to go out to probably Tompkins Square Park, or it could have been Washington Square. And one of the big parks where people gather, or even Central Park, that's the biggest. And he was going to speak on what Prabhupada called the peace formula, which you probably know is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5, text 29. So in that purport to 529, famous Bhoktarang Jagatapasam, Krishna reveals the peace formula. You attain the supreme spiritual peace if you know Krishna as the supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, the benefactor, the beneficiary of all sacrifices, and the Suhrit, the dearmost friend of all living entities. That's a person who can attain the supreme spiritual peace. So it was a very creative idea that instead of just honoring the soldiers, you honor the people who can actually bring peace, and then you won't have to have wars. Prabhupada's going right to the root, as he always did, the root of the problem. It's a lack of Krishna consciousness that makes people become nationalistic and bellicose and antagonistic to their fellow human beings. We don't recognize that we're all sons and daughters of the same Father. So Prabhupada was preparing that, but at the same time, ever since he'd come back from San Francisco, this was 1967, he came back in April, and so at the end of May was the time when he was supposed to give the speech. Prabhupada was having spells of being dizzy and just wasn't feeling well in general, and also heart palpitations. So it might have been the Memorial Day itself. Yeah, actually it was, because everything was closed. So he was supposed to speak later in the day, but that morning, he was getting severe chest pains, and it reminded him of the pains he felt on the Jaladuta 2 years earlier when he came over on the ship. He had those 2 heart attacks, and Prabhupada started to feel like that again, and his arm was going numb, and these are symptoms of a heart attack coming on. And then the pain, and then the attack came, and he said, "Hare Krishna," and he threw up his arms, and he fell back in the arms of let's see, it was Chuck and Keith, so that would have been Achyutananda and Kirtanananda, and then Prabhupada told them he survived that, but then he told them, massage my heart. So they were doing that. And then the devotees were frantic. They'd never seen Swamiji like this, and they wanted to help him, but they didn't know how. And they were frantically calling doctors, but it was Memorial Day. Everything was closed. Finally, they found one Jewish doctor on the Lower East Side, and he came over, and he was also off, but he agreed to come because it was close by. He was close. So he came over, and he said, "You've got to get this man to the hospital. You've got to get, I think the devotees told him he was, I forget, something like their grandfather or something. So you've got to get him to a hospital." And then, so they took Prabhupada to the hospital, a hospital called Beth Israel. just not many blocks from where I was born. And they started doing tests. And this is all told in the Lilamrita, how at one point they gave Prabhupada what they called a spinal tap, a very painful, now this is back in the 60s, I'm sure they have less invasive ways of doing this, but they were giving Prabhupada a big needle, and then it must have been very painful. And the devotees even asked Prabhupada, how did you tolerate that? Prabhupada said, we are tolerant. Prabhupada actually had a high level of tolerance for pain. And then Prabhupada told them, look, this is after a couple of days, get me out of here. They're just using me to experiment. You know, they were running all these tests. They wanted to do it. They wanted to probe his brain too. That was the last straw. As soon as Prabhupada heard they wanted to do some test on his brain, then, or even operate or something, then they said, okay, get me out of here. They're not helping me. They're just using me as a body to experiment on. So, but the doctors didn't want to do that. They wouldn't release him. So if you've read the Lilamrita, you see there's this dramatic scene where Gargamuni and Brahmananda are just, they unhooked Prabhupada from all the wires. They were monitoring his vital signs, and then Prabhupada was on the gurney, the bed with wheels, and they just wheeled him out of the room. And they were trying to find the exit. They went down the elevator and they were trying to find the exit to the hospital, just because they called somebody up and they had a car waiting outside, and then, but by Chris's arrangement, they ended up in another room where all the doctors were, and they were getting ready to make a test on Prabhupada. And then the doctors saw what the devotees were doing. They were trying to leave, and they said, "Don't do this. You will kill this old man. We are not responsible for this." So they made the devotees sign papers because the devotees insisted. And you can imagine the scene. Prabhupada's sitting up now in the bed. He's chanting on beads. And he's saying, get me out of here. And the doctors are saying, if you take him out of here, you're going to kill him. So they must have been feeling a lot of pressure between the two contradictory orders. But they believe Prabhupada. They believe Swamiji. So they made the devotees sign all the papers saying we're not responsible for what's going on here, and it's their responsibility. And then they took him into a car, and then they brought him down the Jersey Shore, which is a favorite kind of resort place for New Yorkers. New Jersey's just below New York. And it was June by this time, but somehow or other the weather wasn't good. There's pictures of Prabhupada on this Jersey Shore, and in a place called Long Branch, which is actually where my mother and father married in 1946. But anyway, Long Branch, New Jersey, there's a nice beach, there's a nice shore. And they were at somebody said that Swamiji could use his bungalow, his beach bungalow. But the weather wasn't good, even though it was June. It was very blustery, windy, chilly. And so the devotees in San Francisco said, oh, Swamiji, come out here. You will get better in sunny California, right? Because San Francisco is way on the other side of the country. New York is the East Coast and San Francisco is the West. But as I read, when Prabhupada came out there, that didn't work either, because San Francisco actually is not that warm. There's a famous line by an American writer named Mark Twain, who said, the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. He was a humorous writer. And I've lived out there too, and I know it's not really, even in the summer, it doesn't really get that warm. And Prabhupada was living they had got him another beach bungalow, this time on the Pacific Ocean side, and the mountains were blocking the sun. And then it's pretty foggy out there too. So Prabhupada didn't get much sun really. So it's that place, that beach bungalow, where that incident happened, where because Prabhupada's saying, look, I have to go back to India for a while just to recover my health. I need India's heat. I need Ayurvedic massage, healing oils and herbs, and so he did that. But then they became very afraid. What happens if you don't come back, Swamiji? What happens if you die there? What should we do? Should we get one of your godbrothers to come? And that's when Prabhupada got very emotional and said, actually, it's an insult to the spiritual master. If you consult one of my godbrothers and they say one word different from me, you will be confused. That actually happened after Prabhupada left this world years later. Some people did go to Prabhupada's godbrothers, and they didn't get the right information, and it was chaos. That's another seminar. So Prabhupada went back to India, and it worked. He came back in December of 67. He looked better than ever. He was very robust and healthy, and his renewed energy. But it was really touch and go that spring of 67 and summer when Prabhupada was after that attack. He did get better. Although even when he came back, the one thing that was still kind of lingering from his stroke was that he was hearing noises in his head. You can hear Prabhupada say this on a recording. I was hearing a sound like bong, 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 and it was making me half mad, Prabhupada said. But that eventually went away too. But the whole time Prabhupada was with us, he was always dealing with maladies, with disease, which, if he just took it easy, he probably would have had an easier time. But Prabhupada was so surrendered. He was nonstop, 14 times in 12 years. And yeah, so his body finally just wore out at the age of 81. Okay, we have about 25 minutes. That was a good question.
Chandralekha Nair Mataji, you can please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. It was
Hare
very
Krishna.
nice, very nice to hear from you. I mean, I'm so new to ISKCON, like to chant Hare Krishna and to listen to Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, to know about the happenings and the turmoils Srila Prabhupada Swamiji underwent was really overwhelming and so touching. I mean, what advice do you have? Because we as human being, very ordinary human being, we do get carried away with some, though we keep chanting, listening to Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, what Krishna says to us, still we are getting carried away. And Guruji, Swamiji, Prabhupada ji, he had done so many things, like unconditionally and selflessly. He has done a lot of things. And from that, what is your advice for us to carry things of his lifetime and achievements and to go forward in our, Krishna consciousness? Thank you.
Jai. Okay, Mataji. Thank you for your question. First of all, we don't have to be Prabhupada. Prabhupada was sent by Lord Chaitanya to do a specific mission. He exhibited all the symptoms of a Shakyavesh avatar. So the worst thing we can do is try to compare our position to Prabhupada's position and think that if we can't be Prabhupada, somehow we're failures. All we have to do is follow him, follow his instructions. And that's no small thing. But if we become dedicated followers of Prabhupada by studying his life, teachings, mood, and mission, then that's a successful life. So how to do that? Whether we're so-called new in the movement or old in the movement or middle in the movement, it always comes down to association. So just keep company with devotees who are serious and sincere, and you will become like them. I think I told the story maybe last time. My godbrother said, Prabhupada, how do you become a pure devotee? And Prabhupada said, how do you become a drunkard? You associate with drunks, and they will teach you how to be first-class drunkard, Prabhupada said. So, sangat sanjayate kama. As we sangha, so we calm. As we associate, so we desire. So we just have to keep ourselves in good association. And it's contagious, because people who are actually advancing in Krishna consciousness, they're getting a higher taste. And you become happier and happier, actually. Whereas the older you get in material life, the more you lament, oh, so many things I wanted to do in this life, I never did them. And so many people are depending on me, and now I'm leaving this world. And, there's so much lamentation connected with material life. But spiritual life, we find community, we find purpose, we find joy. This is the matchless gifts that Prabhupada left us. So just keep your eyes and ears open, and seek good association, and be the good association. And then that's a happy ISKCON. That's my short answer over Zoom.
The next question in chat is, the question says, how are the temples in America faring now, Prabhuji? Is there the same zeal and enthusiasm amongst the devotees now? Is the movement still growing? That's the question.
Yeah, this is very familiar. Didn't I answer this last week? Anyway, it's a common question for people on the other side of the world to ask me here in America. So it's just different, that's all. When the movement in America, when Prabhupada was walking among us, the whole movement was American-based. Basically, Americans were running everything. And because that's where Prabhupada came first. It was kind of natural. And it was all communal. Everybody was living inside temples. There was no such thing as a congregation. Either you were in or you were out. Because there was no supportive culture here. There was no spiritual culture. It was the culture of Walt Disney and what else? And McDonald's and Coca-Cola and baseball, and there was no supportive spiritual culture that really understood what we were doing. We were kind of like dug in these communes, and it was kind of us against them. At least that was the neophyte mentality. Now in America, most, like everywhere else in the world, most of the devotees are living in their own homes, and they work, and kids go to school, and so it's just different. So it's growing for sure, but it's not like growing in the sense that growing how we used to. In the old days, when we used to think of achievements or growth, we used to think of how many people have shaved up this week, how many have moved into the temple, like that. It's not like that. It's the devotees are becoming influential in their own fields, in medical fields and publishing fields, but you name it, in education. As one journalist wrote an article not long ago and said, it used to be that you could tell who the Hare Krishnas were because they were all on the street corners wearing dhotis and saris and singing. But now you're likely to meet a Hare Krishna in the cubicle next to you in the corporation. Or you might be surprised that the person at your workplace is actually a Hare Krishna. So that's kind of how it's changed. Of course, the temples that Prabhupada established, the centers, the restaurants, and the schools and the institutes and the farms, they will always be special because Prabhupada started them, and they're very they're sacred places, actually. So the temple, even if it's congregation based, the temple should still be the center of that community. Congregation, if it's inspired, will offer seva to the temple and offer financial support to the temple and start programs to make the temple a more vibrant place of learning and worship and enlightenment. Yeah. So I'd say we're doing pretty well in America, but it's you can't compare it to the old. It's like apples, as they say, apples to oranges. It's just different time, different place. As Prabhupada told my godbrother Koladri Prabhu, Koladri's he's still active. He works with properties. He sort of works with the GBC on protecting properties, and so ISKCON properties. So he has a nice memory of Prabhupada about how he was with Prabhupada. I think in October of '77, it was toward the end. And they had talks about Varnashram. And then Prabhupada was sharing with Koladri how in the future, ISKCON will look nothing like it does today, which is natural. Just like, if you have a baby and then it grows, it's going to change and mature. And so, we have to keep the essential teachings and mission and Prabhupada's life example and mood intact, but we have to grow. We have to grow. And that will look differently in different parts of the world. Good question. Okay. We have 15 minutes.
Another question, which is in the chat. Though Prabhupada sought help from his godbrothers, he could not get any support.
Mm-hmm.
That, though they were all his own godbrothers, disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, and this was also the order of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So why didn't they support him? That's the question.
Okay, I missed that last line. But they were what? They were disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta. So why didn't they help?
Yeah, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave this common order to everybody. And when they saw Prabhupada was trying to do something, why didn't they support and cooperate? That's the question.
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, because you'll see in the next lesson, very dramatically, what happened. How, I don't want to give it away. It's very dramatic. Well, you probably know the history, but the way it unfolds in 1935, especially. 1935 was a very dramatic year in Prabhupada's life because Prabhupada received three blessings from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, which I will talk about next time. But just to give you a little preview, as time went on, the mission that Bhaktisiddhanta started, which was so inspired, and sometimes you hear that he initiated 60,000 disciples and established 108 mutts and all this, and then sent preachers to Europe. That spirit, that preaching spirit, it became compromised in the 1930s as time went on. And you'll see how Bhaktisiddhanta saw this and how he foresaw the end, the demise, the breakup of his own mission. But he also saw in the person of Prabhupada, the person who would become our Prabhupada, somebody who would be capable of reviving it. So why didn't they? Why didn't they help him? Because after Bhaktisiddhanta left, it was they began fighting. They ignored his final instruction. The final instruction was form a GBC. That GBC concept was there from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Form a GBC, work cooperatively, continue initiating people. But they didn't do that. They just, 2 or 3 parties began to compete for who was going to be the next big Acharya. When a founder Acharya leaves, you don't replace him. There's no question of replacing a founder Acharya. What you do is you cooperate to serve the mission, continue the line. And so they didn't do that. They didn't form a GBC. There was some half-hearted attempt to form the GBC, but that was quickly eclipsed by the ambitions of 2 or 3 parties putting forth their own candidates, and none of them were authorized to do that. So they all failed. They began to fight in the courts over the assets of the Gaudiya Math. It was a big disgrace. It was a mess. And so those who still wanted to practice, they just retreated into their own mutts, and there was no longer a united mission. This became fragmented. And so by the time Prabhupada, 30 years later, mid-30s to mid-60s, by the time he came to America, there was no, institution left to support him. He had to do it all on his own. But still, he was doing 2 things when he came. He was studying Americans. Prabhupada was from September 65 when he came. And he was writing his godbrothers. As I read that letter excerpt. Are you ready to cooperate? If you cooperate, it'll be very nice. And I don't want, you can be in charge, he was saying to Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, who was Kunja Bihari, Kunja Babu. He was a recruit from the Ramakrishna mission. And he got inspired by Bhaktisiddhanta's preaching, so he joined the Gaudiya mission. And he was very good fundraiser, very good manager. He knew how to manage men and money. Bhaktisiddhanta pretty much let him, run the finances of the mission. So Prabhupada said, so can we cooperate now? I know that you're a good fundraiser. By Guru Maharaj's mercy, you know how to inspire those Calcutta Marwaris, the crore-patis, the rich people. And furthermore, you have the contacts in Delhi, in the government house in New Delhi, to get those rupees released as dollars in America, because the Indian government didn't want to do that. But Kunja Bihari, or Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, after he took sannyas, he was well connected in business and politics, and but he didn't help. Yeah, Prabhupada tried others, but he was the one that had the most to offer, really, in terms of supplying some funds for Prabhupada. Because Prabhupada said in the letter, he said, look, the Ramakrishna mission are here, and they got a $1 million skyscraper right in the middle of Manhattan. But we need a skyscraper too. And I can recruit people, I can manage it, but I just need funds. So can you help? But the offense that they all had committed of disobeying Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's orders to work cooperatively, the fallout, the consequences of that offense were still there. There was still too much bad blood between the godbrothers after fighting over who's going to control Gaudiya Math. So they were disqualified. They disqualified themselves. And that's when, over 10 months' time, from September 65 to July 66, when Prabhupada incorporated ISKCON, Lord Chaitanya showed Prabhupada he was going to have to start a brand new branch, make a clean break from that mess and be the founder Acharya of a new branch. Prabhupada writes in CC that the Bhakti Kalpataru, the ISKCON, is a branch of Lord Chaitanya's Bhakti Kalpataru, the desire tree of devotional service. So the same thing can happen to us if we don't cooperate, if we split, if we make politics. You know, it's a big warning to us of what can happen to a spiritual movement if we don't make the desires of Founder Acharya front and center and give up our petty material desires. Okay, we have a few minutes left. If there's anybody else.
Yes, Prabhu. There is a question from a young devotee, yet very senior in age.
Mm-hmm.
Asking, what is zest in Krishna consciousness and how do we achieve it in its purest form?
What is best? B-E-S-T?
Z-E-S-T, zest, Z.
Again, best?
Z-E-S-T.
Oh, Z.
Z.
Okay, zest.
Yes.
What is enthusiasm?
Yeah, and how to achieve it in its purest form?
Same answer as the other nice Mataji. Associate with people who have that zest. It's called lolium lala samai, the nectar of devotion. If you read Nectar of Devotion, I highly recommended you read. Everybody should read it, young or old, newer veteran, whatever. We all have to become enthusiastic. We have to be greedy. Actually means greed. Spiritual greed, lolium. It's like Prabhupada, he was so enthusiastic to spread. You know, that's why he neglected his health even. I mean, he took care of his health, but he didn't make his health number one. He made the opportunities that Krishna presented him number one. So maybe we can't imitate that. You know, we're still so conditioned, but still, you will meet, if you've already, I'm sure you already have met devotees who are just so, they're so eager. It's an eagerness. Eager to serve the mission and to advance Krishna consciousness all over the world. And one key to becoming eager is to become convinced of the absolute necessity of Krishna consciousness, that as Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada said, there's no lacking of anything in the world. The only lacking is Krishna consciousness. You can see, though, there's so many resources that humanity, unfortunately, is squandering and spoiling and ruining, you know, out of greed. But people, because of lack of Krishna consciousness, it's all being wasted. So by becoming absorbed in Prabhupada's teachings, his spoken word, his written word, we also become on fire with that conviction that the only thing that can really help this world and myself and my family and friends and my yatra and anything is that higher taste of serving Krishna's desires. So, yeah, read that section in Nectar of Devotion. That's the only price to go back to Godhead, is to become greedy, to be Krishna conscious. And Prabhupada is a source of our inspiration. He's the most eager.
Prabhuji, in regard to the previous question, I have a question regarding
this will be the last one because I have to go.
Regarding the lobha or the greed. Doesn't it manifest properly only once you cross the anartha nivritti phase? If I'm still struggling with my anarthas, how do I properly understand this aspect of lolium? Doesn't it need some initial purification in the association of devotees? Then only I can functionally act upon it.
Well, sure. I mean, once the more we're free of those unwanted desires and habits and patterns, that we're just better at it. We might have an initial I'm just thinking now of a new devotee, newly initiated right here in Tucson, Arizona. He's so enthusiastic. I mean, it's very inspiring to see somebody so enthusiastic. But at the same time, he's got some old, habits. Not habits. What's just sort of ways of being that will drop off the more he does his seva. So it's not that we can't do it, but the way to get rid of those anarthas is just by doing our seva, but in the association of mature devotees. Again, the same thing. In that sangha of mature devotees, it exposes our anarthas to us so that we become embarrassed. It takes time, but it's not that we can't do anything until, but it's both. We have to, with tivrena bhakti yogena, with tivra bhakti, very enthusiastic, intense bhakti, we move ahead, and then those things, they just drop off like a snake shedding its old skin. So it's not either or, it's both and. Yeah.
Prabhuji, you mentioned Tivrena Bhakti Yogena Yajeta Purusham Param, that verse. In the translation of the verse, Prabhupada writes Tivrena means forceful, but in the purport it's selfless Bhakti. So how can a sadhaka in the initial stages perform Tivrena? And the verse is also Akama Sarva Kamo Va. So if a person has Sarva Kam, how can he be selfless in his performance of Bhakti? How can he be Tivra?
Well, it's a journey. That's the same thing. At least when we hear that, at least when we know the goal and we know the example that our founder Acharya set, at least we know that's what we want to be when we grow up. I mean, but in the material world, when people quote go for it, they keep all their anarthas, because they think becoming successful means to become the most aggressive, and I'm going to cut down my competition, and we don't. We're full of material desires, sarvakama, but then we become akama, selfless. The more we associate with selfless people, and being selfless is very attractive. We'll notice as we traverse the bhakti marg that if we want friends, if we want to associate with people who are advanced, we have to become a little less self-centered. For example, people who are always hogging the conversation, they're always turning the conversation back to themselves. That's so unattractive. Who wants to associate with somebody who's always hogging the spotlight, hogging? Rather, we're attracted to people who are always giving credit to others, who are trying to serve others, like that. That's an attractive devotee. So it just takes time, and along with being eager, we have to be patient, because it doesn't happen overnight. Think about it. We've been cultivating our old fruitive, self-centered ways for lifetimes, so it takes time, but it can happen in the association of advanced devotees. So look for that and become that. And I have to leave on that note. So thank you so much. And next time it will be his mission's roots, from the time Prabhupada met his Guru Maharaj until, actually, it's not till the time he gets on the Jalabuddha. It's going to be till the time of Gandhi's assassination. Yeah. I break up these lessons differently for different presentations. So that's how we do it on Founder Acharya Essentials on Zoom. Okay, Prabhus, thank you for your interest, your questions. And next time we will meet again. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. We are eagerly waiting for the next session already. Hare Krishna.
Jai. Hari Bol.